how honored I am to be here. It's a magnificent city. It's my first time in Hong Kong, and I've been completely blown away by the splendor of the city. And also to be in this very ancient civilization, which has been so important in the development of the world, and which will continue to be. I'm going to talk about something different. And really what I'm going to talk about is stories about how we see the world and the implications for the future. I'm going to start off with what I'm going to call the Earth community story. So going right back to the beginning, and there are many ways of telling the story, so I'm going to adopt the scientific one, although I'm not a scientist. So we think that way back in the beginning there was a big bang, and out of the void surged this energy, and gradually as waves swept, gravitational waves swept through the matter, in a mysterious way this chaos began to organize itself, and we got the galaxies developing. And one particular solar system was quite extraordinary, because in our solar system there was a planet, Earth, that was a particular size, particular distance from the sun, and the sun was a particular heat that had enabled solids, liquids, and gases to coexist. And as this evolutionary process unfolded, something quite extraordinary happened. On this blue planet, life emerged, completely unpredicted from what had happened before, and life began to function in a way which regulated the planet. It began, as you've heard yesterday, to stabilize the composition of the atmosphere and the temperature within ranges which are conducive to life flourishing. And there has been a very, very long evolutionary story, and that story is continuing. And very late in the day, that little yellow square right at the end, the Holocene, is where we are now. And very late in this very long evolutionary story, these strange hominids emerged in Africa. And at that stage, and in all early civilizations, it was completely understood that we humans were wholly dependent on Earth. So different cultures use different metaphors, but typically the Earth Mother metaphor was used. So it was understood that human beings were completely dependent on the fertility of Earth. She was like a mother that fed and nourished her children. So for the vast majority of human history, the understanding has been that we humans are embedded within a system which feeds us and nurtures us, and without which we cannot exist. However, relatively recently in human history, a different story has been told. It's a story which I've called the colonial story. In Europe, it was characterized by the Age of Enlightenment. Well, that was one of the major steps forward. On the left, you have René Descartes, who famously emphasized the difference between the material world and the spiritual world, and Sir Francis Bacon on the right, who made a major contribution to the scientific method, etc. But the idea of the world, the story of how the world works at this stage is very different. So in the 16th and 17th century, we have a mechanistic idea of the world. So this is a model of the universe showing the sun and the earth as it was conceived of at that time. Now, it's seen at this stage as a machine, like a complex watch. And the purpose of science is to take it apart and to look at each of the cogs individually so you can work out how it works. Because if you know, the understanding is that if you know how each cog works, you can work out how the machine works. If you know how the machine works, you can use it and operate it for the benefit of humankind. Now, you can see how different this model is from an understanding of the world as a sacred mother to whom one must owe respect. And of course, one of the key developments in human civilization is the discovery that we can access energy from beneath the soil. So first of all, coal, later oil and gas. We no longer have to rely simply on the energy we get from our food. I'm told that this makes us about 70 or 80 times stronger. And if you think of how long it would have taken you to walk here today, you get some sense of the difference that this makes to civilizations. And very soon we have a massive population explosion, you have the Industrial Revolution, and you have an increasing separation from nature, because this extra energy gives us the power to transform our environment in a way that has never happened before. This is a painting called American Progress. It's 1872. And you can see here the different mythologies that emerged. Here is Progress portrayed as a goddess. And as she flies across America, she's trailing the telegraph lines behind her. She's followed by the trains and the stagecoaches and the settlers. And she's dispelling the darkness in front of her. And the darkness has the buffalo fleeing and the indigenous people fleeing before her. Now, this is a very different idea. But I think that this painting is very accurate because it portrays the fact that although we like to think of mythologies as something that belonged to ancient civilizations and Greece and Rome, etc., in fact, every society has its mythologies. It has its stories which it tells itself to explain why the world is as it is. And if we were to paint this painting today, we would probably call her something like development. And then this leads to colonialism. This is Cecil John Rhodes astride Africa, also with the telegraph lines. And the idea here is that the dominant country can go out and exploit other parts of the world and bring the riches back to the colonial power. Today, this is probably our idea of what progress means. Very, very different idea from what is dominated throughout the majority of human history. It's also reflected in our idea of economies. Pretty much most countries in the world strive for infinite economic growth, upward GDP curves. We do it in companies. And the idea, the importance to appreciate here is this is a striving for more and more. It is not striving for balance. In other words, more is always better. So the system is not designed to produce balance. Suddenly, we begin to have some reality checks. Pollution, health problems, acid rain, and now climate change. We're experiencing already the effects of climate change all over the world. Desertification, the glaciers melting and the greenhouse, the Greenland ice cap potentially slipping off into the sea. So suddenly we begin to get feedback from Earth that maybe our mental model, our map of the terrain, isn't so accurate. And we know that other civilizations have failed in the past. This is pretty much what's left of a great civilization that once flourished on Easter Island. But to cut a long story short, they spent too much time building monuments to their chiefs and to compete with prestige among one another, cut down all the big trees which enabled them to build the canoes, which enabled them to get far out to sea to fish. And as a result of that and other environmental degradation, societies collapsed, population numbers went down, people started eating each other, and eventually stabilized at a very low level. But there are many, many stories of civilizations collapsing because they have degraded their environment. So this is not a theoretical thing that we're facing. We are now getting the feedback that our civilization is headed in the same direction. The question is, which way to a viable future? There are two opposing worldviews, I think. The one is that humans are the pinnacle of the evolutionary process and are entitled to monopolize natural resources and to outcompete other species. I would say that that's the dominant worldview today. The other is a much older worldview, is that humans are an integral and inseparable part of a community of life, without which we cannot exist, and so the health of the whole is paramount. Now, obviously there are variations on these, but I think it's fair to characterize these as two important worldviews. So that's pretty much the first one. We are separate from Earth. Earth has turned into a possession, territory to be marked out and controlled for our benefit. The other point of view is not only an ancient point of view, it's also what's coming out of quantum physics, ecology, and scientific theories like the Gaia theory. The Gaia theory points out that Earth behaves as if it were an organism in the sense it regulates its temperature, etc. And there's more and more evidence emerging that this is true. These are microscopic marine algae called coccolithophores, and they emit dimethyl sulfide, which seeds clouds. They effectively draw calcium bicarbonate out of the water to create their shells, which are chalk. And when they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean and sequestrate CO2. So this is one of the methods that the planet has been using to stabilize the climate. But to bring it down to earth, let me show you how these two worldviews are playing out in international politics. First of all, taking the COP15 in Copenhagen. This is part of the main negotiating room at the Bella Center. Now, when I saw what that looked like, and what it looks like when you get 192 odd countries, each with their delegations, each horse trading, pursuing national interest, etc. And I thought, imagine if you were a CEO of a company and you had to go, your company was headed for bankruptcy, and you had to push through a very, very tough turnaround plan, and you had to do it in that room and get it through there. What are the chances of you getting something strong through that? Now, I know there have been good international agreements negotiated by similar processes before, but what I'm suggesting to you is that that pipe is pretty much blocked. It's like the arteries that have been narrowed by self-interest. And outside of the Bella Center, you had the energy and the power. These are people who came from all over the world to march in the streets to pressurize the leaders to make a deal. So this is the kind of pressure which is building in the world, which is not getting through those narrowed arteries. And of course, they're met by fairly tough police, which keeps the people out, and there's a strong feeling of exclusion afterwards. So this is pretty much where I think we are. This is a cartoon showing world leaders heading towards a climate change iceberg. And they say, it's settled. We agree to sign a pledge to hold another meeting to consider changing course at a date yet to be determined. Because, of course, the key thing is changing course. It's not just a question of slowing down anymore. We need to go in a different direction. After the failure of the Copenhagen, something new happens. This is President Evo Morales of Bolivia, the poorest country in Latin America, who responds by saying, I'm calling a People's World Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth, a few months later in April this year in Bolivia. And I believe, he says that he believes that climate change is an issue for the people and the people's voice must be heard. That's Cochabamba, a small town, but as you fly down from the capital, La Paz, you fly alongside the Andes, and you can see the glaciers, and some of them have melted and some have gone. But the people in the lowlands like Cochabamba, they know that when, as they put it, the mountains lose their white ponchos, there'll be no more water. So climate change is not an abstract concept for them, and they also know that they can't solve that problem within Bolivia. So the People's World Conference is a very different affair. They were expected about 15,000 people, and then the volcano erupted in Iceland, so nobody from Europe and Asia and North Africa could get there. So initially they thought, well, it's going to be a lot less than that. In fact, more than 35,000 people turned up. And this event has been almost invisible in the press and the rest of the world.